that would reveal one of the music industry's harsh realities. When the decision was made to change Sylvester James Jr.'s first album title, it wasn't just a name that would be affected, but the artist's original vision as well. According to music industry sources, the commercial concerns about changing the Scratch My Flower album title were discussed, and this process became one of the factors that limited Sylvester's artistic control. Don't forget to subscribe as we explore this story, because in the coming minutes we'll shed light on one of the music industry's darkest chapters. In his small home in San Francisco's Castro district, Sylvester was putting the finishing touches on his carefully prepared album cover designs. Every line, every color had been chosen so meticulously that even the gardenia-scented stickers were specially manufactured. The name Scratch My Flower hadn't come to him randomly. This title was the most explicit expression of his sexual identity and also a challenge thrown at the hypocritical face of the music industry. Sylvester was still a young 30-year-old artist in those days, but he was absolutely confident in the power and message of his music. Walking down Castro Street, the same melody constantly played in his head, the first notes of "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real," echoing in his soul even before they were recorded. In the first meetings with Fantasy Records, company executives seemed mesmerized by Sylvester's creative vision. Harvey Fuqua, as a former Motown producer, immediately recognized the potential in Sylvester's voice. But commercial concerns also plagued his mind. "This voice is worth its weight in gold," Fuqua had said, "but we need to talk with the marketing department." The real meaning hidden behind these words was much more complex. The company was worried about how Sylvester's open sexual identity would be received in the mainstream music market, and this concern would weigh much heavier than artistic freedom. In December 1977, music industry executives at Fantasy Records' Berkeley office made controversial decisions about Sylvester's album concept. According to music industry sources, company executives believed the Scratch My Flower album title would create marketability challenges in the mainstream market. The commercial concerns that music companies experienced when working with LGBT+ artists during this period would affect Sylvester's creative vision. Reports from the marketing department indicated that the album title was seen as problematic in terms of radio station playability. Fantasy Records' approach at the time reflected the attempt to balance preserving artists' authentic identities with commercial success. This situation exemplified the music industry's general attitude toward LGBT+ artists in the late 1970s. Sylvester's Scratch My Flower concept hadn't emerged by chance. Working in the small studio of his Castro home late at night, he was enchanted by the scent of a gardenia flower on his desk. This flower was the same type as those his grandmother Julia grew in her garden during his childhood years, and every breath took him back to those innocent days. He had drawn the album title idea from these fragrant memories. Scratch My Flower was both a sexual metaphor and a poetic expression of nostalgic longing for the past. He had struggled for weeks to have the gardenia-scented stickers specially manufactured, placing a custom order with a small printing house in San Francisco. These stickers weren't just an aesthetic choice. They were a concrete manifestation of the special connection Sylvester established with his fans. Everyone who held the album would smell that unique gardenia scent, and this experience would combine with the music to create an unforgettable memory. When Sylvester explained this idea to friends at home, his eyes sparkled. "I want people to not just hear my music, but feel it too. This album should appeal to all the senses." This visionary approach was very unusual in the music industry of the late 1970s, but Sylvester's creative courage knew no bounds. The initial feedback from Fantasy Records surprised Sylvester. When Harvey Fuqua called him saying, "There's a small discussion about the album title, but don't worry, we'll resolve it," Sylvester thought this was just a commercial detail. However, as days passed, he noticed that he was no longer being invited to meetings at the company. Critical decisions like marketing planning, final cover design, and even single selection were being made without his knowledge. Martha Wash was the first to notice this situation. "Sylvester, why aren't you attending meetings anymore? Isn't this your album?" When she asked this, the first doubts began to form in Sylvester's mind. Behind the company's secretive behavior was a systematic plan. According to music industry practices of that era, a phase strategy was prepared to completely eliminate Sylvester's "scratch my flower" concept. In the first phase, he would be told that the album title needed to be changed for commercial reasons. In the second phase, the cover design would be requested to be made suitable for the mainstream market. And in the final phase, the gardenia-scented stickers would be canceled under the excuse of production difficulties. This plan was so detailed that it even included how explanations would be made to Sylvester at each stage. The strategic document noted by marketing approaches of that time included this observation: "We must proceed slowly to break Sylvester's resistance. If we change everything at once, he'll rebel." In February 1978, Harvey Fuqua found himself having to explain the commercial realities of the music industry to Sylvester. In the meeting held at his Castro home, Fuqua summarized the situation as follows: "Sylvester, the company wants to change the album title. They find 'Scratch My Flower' commercially risky." This explanation deeply affected Sylvester. After thinking for a long time, he asked, "Isn't my opinion being sought at all?" Fuqua's answer was clear: "The company has made its decision. Either you accept it or the project gets canceled." This ultimatum was one of the most difficult decisions in Sylvester's career. On one hand was his artistic integrity. On the other hand was the music career he had dreamed of. After thinking for days, he made a pragmatic decision. "Okay, we'll change the album title, but no one touches the music." This concession was very painful for him, but at that time it was a necessary step for an openly sexual identity artist to survive in the music industry. When Harvey Fuqua reported this decision to the company, the executives breathed a sigh of relief because they knew that breaking Sylvester's resistance wouldn't be easy. The search for a new album title to replace "Scratch My Flower" proved more difficult than expected. Fantasy Records' marketing department worked on dozens of alternatives: "Sylvester Sings," "Dance with Sylvester," "The Fabulous Sylvester." Each was more ordinary, safer, more marketable than the last. Sylvester was completely excluded from this process and was only informed of the final decision. Sylvester. Plain, simple, uncontroversial. Behind this name choice was a subtle calculation. By using Sylvester's own name, it was trying to make it seem as if this was his own preference. A similar process operated for the album cover. Instead of Sylvester's gardenia-themed, colorful, and bold design, a more masculine-looking photograph was used. In this photograph, Sylvester wore a suit and his hair was styled in a more conservative manner. The most painful detail was the complete removal of the gardenia-scented stickers. The production manager explained this decision as cost savings, but the real reason lay much deeper. The company was trying to erase every trace of Sylvester's sexual identity from the album. When the Sylvester album was released in spring 1978, it achieved commercial success, but Sylvester felt a great emptiness inside. While "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real" played on the radio, "Scratch My Flower" was always on his mind. Those scented stickers, that bold cover design, that explicit album title, they were all just a dream now. Working with Patrick Cowley in the studio, he would sometimes say, "I wish we could have implemented that first idea." Though Cowley tried to console him every time saying, "Gishdar, music is what matters, not the name." This was the bleeding side of Sylvester's wound. Martha Wash and Azora Rhodes closely observed Sylvester's disappointment. During rehearsal breaks, Sylvester would sometimes pull out old design sketches and show them, saying, "It was going to be like this." The sadness in his eyes was so obvious that Martha once said, "Sylvester, maybe we can do it the way you want on the next album." However, Sylvester's answer was realistic. "Martha, as long as the system doesn't change, we'll always have to play by their rules." This album title change at Fantasy Records was an example that reflected the music industry's approach to LGBT plus artists in the late 1970s. What Sylvester experienced wasn't a unique case. Many artists with different identities faced similar commercial pressures during the same period. However, most had to accept this situation and tried to conform to industry rules. Sylvester's attitude was to respond to this systematic approach through art. Even though the album title changed, the original identity expression in his music never diminished. Sylvester's contract with Fantasy Records was signed in October 1977, and this agreement gave him the opportunity to make his first professional album. According to the contract terms, Sylvester committed to making 3 albums, with at least 10 songs on each album. The budget allocated for the first album's production was $50,000, which represented a mid-level figure by 1977 standards. Harvey Fuqua's production experience was critical for the efficient use of this budget. Studio recordings were made at Fantasy Studios in Berkeley, and these facilities were among the most advanced recording studios on the West Coast at that time. Sylvester greatly enjoyed working in this professional environment because he had previously only made small club recordings. His collaboration with Martha Wash and Azora Rhodes, known as 2 Tons of Fun, also took shape during this period, and the trio's vocal harmonies became the album's distinctive feature. The writing process of "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real" featured on the album was particularly interesting. Sylvester had developed this song's melody late at night at his Castro home on an old piano. The song's lyrics reflected his own sexual identity search and transformation on stage. Dance, Disco Heat was designed to create a more collective energy and was inspired by dance rituals on disco floors. The 1977 to 1978 period was when disco music reached its commercial peak. The Saturday Night Fever soundtrack had moved disco to the center of mainstream culture, but it also increased the risk of the genre's standardization under commercial pressures. In this environment, Sylvester's music represented disco's origins in underground club culture and contained elements that needed to be adapted to the mainstream market. Fantasy Records had become famous in the 1970s with rock groups like Creedence Clearwater Revival, but their experience in disco music was limited. The company's A&R department recognized Sylvester's potential but experienced uncertainties about marketing. At that time, there wasn't sufficient data in the industry about the commercial performance of LGBT plus themed music, and companies preferred to take conservative approaches. Radio stations' programming policies were also an important factor. In the late 1970s, most mainstream radio stations avoided broadcasting content they might consider controversial in terms of LGBT plus themes. This situation affected many creative decisions from song titles to album covers. Sylvester's Scratch My Flower concept also became a victim of these commercial realities. The album's recording process took about 4 months, during which Sylvester gained important experience in music arrangement. Harvey Fuqua's Motown background enabled him to add a sophisticated soul sound to the album. Fuqua focused on arrangements that would best showcase Sylvester's vocal abilities and masterfully establish the balance between backing vocals and main vocals. Musicians from the San Francisco Symphony were hired for string section arrangements, adding orchestral depth to the album. The brass section was composed of local jazz musicians and created disco's characteristic energy. While working with these musicians, Sylvester also had the opportunity to develop his vocal techniques and learn to use his falsetto range more controllably. In terms of recording technology, Fantasy Studios' 24-track recording system was one of the most advanced technologies of its time. This allowed Sylvester to record his vocal layers separately and find optimal balance during the mixing stage later. Multi-track recording capabilities played a critical role in producing songs with complex vocal arrangements like You Make Me Feel, Mighty Real. When developing the album's marketing strategy, Fantasy Records' marketing department conducted various demographic analyses. The main target audience was identified as disco music lovers aged 18 to 35, but concrete data about the LGBT+ community's purchasing power was lacking. This uncertainty formed the basis for conservative approaches affecting creative decisions like the album title. In terms of distribution, Fantasy Records' nationwide network could ensure wide-scale distribution of the album, but there were concerns about regional preferences. It was thought that an album title like Scratch My Flower could negatively affect sales performance in conservative markets in southern states. These geographical marketing calculations caused artistic decisions to go through commercial filters. When music industry historians examined Fantasy Records' old documents in 2019, they obtained valuable information about Sylvester's Scratch My Flower experience. This examination helps us understand the relationships between music companies and artists in the late 1970s and the commercial decision-making processes of that era. The information obtained carries historical value in terms of showing how the music industry's approach to LGBT+ artists has changed. Having to accept the decision to change the album title, Sylvester was determined to preserve his own artistic principles. During concerts, while singing You Make Me Feel, Mighty Real, he sometimes gave hints about the original album concept. In Castro Club performances, he was bolder, implying that his first album was planned with a different concept. Although these behaviors bothered Fantasy Records management, they couldn't intervene legally. The most important aspect of Sylvester's attitude was that his music never changed. Even though the album title changed, the identity expression in his songs, the original appearance in his stage performances, and the intimate connection he established with his fans remained as strong as ever. This attitude was one of the leading factors that made him one of the artists supported by the LGBT+ community in the late 1970s. The loss of the original concept designed as Scratch My Flower was a great loss not only for Sylvester but also for music history. If it had been released with those gardenia-scented stickers, that bold cover design, and that explicit album title, it would have left a much stronger mark in disco music history. The release of such an album in 1978 could have been an important turning point in the LGBT+ rights struggle. However, the music industry's commercial concerns prevented the birth of this potential artwork. Music historians today evaluate Scratch My Flower in the lost masterpiece category. Original design sketches found in Berkeley archives, gardenia-scented sticker samples, and Sylvester's handwritten notes show how carefully this album was planned. Every detail was proof of how comprehensive and original Sylvester's artistic vision was. These materials are now preserved as part of a special collection at the University of California and are accessible to researchers. Sylvester's Scratch My Flower experience reveals the most problematic aspects of the artist-industry relationship. On one side was the artist wanting to live his creative freedom to the fullest. On the other side was the industry acting with commercial concerns. This contradiction continues today as it did in the 1970s. However, the censorship Sylvester experienced stemmed not only from commercial but also social prejudices. At that time, an openly sexual identity artist using a bold album title like Scratch My Flower was unacceptable to conservative America. Fantasy Records' attitude was a typical reflection of the music industry mentality of that era. Companies supported LGBT+ artists to the extent that they would make money but wanted them to hide their identities. This hypocritical approach prevented many talented artists from fully revealing their potential. Sylvester's success was even more valuable because it was achieved despite these systematic pressures. Although Scratch My Flower never materialized, the spirit of this concept continued to live in Sylvester's subsequent works. In the 1979 Step 2 album and the 1982 All I Need album, it's possible to see traces of the courage that couldn't find its place in that first album. Sylvester never gave up on pushing the boundaries of the industry and expressed his identity more openly in each new project. This attitude made him not just a musician, but also an activist. Looking at LGBT plus music history today, Sylvester's Scratch My Flower experience is seen as an important reference point. This event was an early example showing how the music industry's approach to sexual identity diversity should change. The ability of artists like Lady Gaga, Frank Ocean, and Lil Nas X to freely express their identities in today's music world is the fruit of the prices paid by pioneers like Sylvester. Music industry researchers evaluate Sylvester's this experience as one of the turning points in artist rights. Today, music companies behave much more consciously about supporting artists' identities, and the Scratch My Flower case serves as a historical lesson reminding us why this is important. Sylvester's Scratch My Flower concept wasn't just a personal artistic vision, it was also an important indicator of disco music's social function. In the late 1970s, disco had become a means of self-expression for marginalized communities, and Sylvester's original approach was at the center of this cultural transformation. The gardenia-scented sticker idea showed that music could be not just an auditory, but a multi-sensory experience. During this period, while Studio 54 culture was at its peak in New York, San Francisco's Castro district was also developing its own unique music scene. Sylvester's experience with Fantasy Records revealed how fragile the bridge between these two different disco cultures was. While a more commercial approach was adopted on the East Coast, artists like Sylvester on the West Coast were following a more experimental and identity-focused path. The collaboration with Patrick Cowley also gained importance in this context. When Cowley's electronic music production combined with Sylvester's vocal ability, the resulting sound pointed to the future of disco music. If the Scratch My Flower project had been realized, this duo could have laid the foundation for their later works that shaped the high NRG genre earlier. Sylvester's experience with Fantasy Records revealed how passive artists were left in the music industry's decision-making mechanisms. This situation formed an important reference point for steps taken to protect artist rights in subsequent years. Music industry lawyers see the process Sylvester experienced as one of the early examples of artists' struggles to preserve creative control. After this experience, Sylvester's relationship with the music industry became more conscious. He began to demand more creative control in his subsequent albums and started to evaluate contract terms more carefully. This approach showed a development parallel to the independent music movement in the 1980s. Even though Sylvester didn't realize it, he shared the spirit of that era's alternative music scene with his artistic autonomy struggle. Harvey Fuqua's role in this process also carried an interesting dimension. As a former Motown producer, he knew the rules of the industry well, but he was also determined to preserve Sylvester's potential. The tension created by this dilemma exemplified the effort to find balance between artistic vision and commercial success that many producers of that time experienced. This experience with Fantasy Records is not just a story of the past. It continues to raise deep questions about the music industry's evolution regarding artistic freedom. Although Sylvester's Scratch My Flower dream never came true, the spirit of that gardenia-scented dream left its mark on music history. Because real art never loses its soul even when it faces obstacles, and that unique voice in Sylvester's music couldn't be silenced by any system. The fact that Sylvester's name is still mentioned with respect in the Castro district shows how meaningful his struggle with the music industry was. Every year at Pride events, when You Make Me Feel Mighty Real plays, the happiness on people's faces is proof of how powerful Sylvester's artistic legacy is. The source of courage, passion for freedom, and identity pride hidden in this song lies in that lost "Scratch My Flower" dream. Although today's music industry has become much more inclusive, artists' struggles for creative control continue. The rise of streaming platforms, the power of social media, and the facilitation of independent music production offer artists alternatives that Sylvester couldn't have in his time. However, commercial pressures and market dynamics still continue to influence artistic decisions. Sylvester's stance against the industry teaches one of music history's most valuable lessons. A real artist never surrenders, just finds different ways. Even though the Scratch My Flower album never came out, the artistic courage that concept represented continued to live in every song, every performance of Sylvester's. And perhaps the story of this lost dream carries a more powerful message than the album that was realized. The message that the struggle given for the sake of being original never goes in vain.